Hello everybody and big welcome to a video about why Urza Mono Blue struggles. And for the occasion, I decided to go with a blue shirt. So don't get me wrong here, people. I'm not saying that Urza is bad. I'm not saying that Urza can't win games or that you shouldn't bring Urza to a cEDH game. What I'm here to say is that Urza has some problems that you need to think about when you're building the deck or considering actually constructing Urza to begin with. I think that the points I'm gonna talk about inside this video are just good in general to know about and, well, consider when building and constructing decks. So on paper he should be amazing. It's mono blue and blue is to be considered the best color inside pretty every format. And he has a ton of amazing abilities. A 4 CMC, 1-4, well, 4 toughness, that's a great blocker, but he also creates a token that is also huge and can block and attack. He can tap artifacts that is going through Null Rod and Collector Oof for blue mana, and for 5 mana you can activate him and basically kind of draw a card. The deck that is usually being played is the Poly Tyrant Urza deck, where you use Polymorph spell on the token that Urza creates to dig through your deck, finding Hullbreaker Horror. And with Hullbreaker Horror and let's go Mana Crypt, Mox Opal or Mox Amber and Mana Crypt or something of the sort, ritual artifacts, you can make infinite mana by casting rock, tapping rock, returning rock, casting rock, tapping rock, returning rock. We usually also play Dramatic Scepter to achieve infinite mana. And Power Artifact and Grim Monolith is also quite popular. So we basically have everything we need in theory. We have a commander that can draw cards and enable a lot of really cool tricks, as well as a few combos that we can go for, and a few of those are one-card combos. So now I should point out and say that Urza might be the commander that I have the absolute best win rate against. I've played against Urza quite a lot. And whenever I see an Urza in the game, I usually win, or I never really see the Urza winning the match. So let's first begin with debunking Urza's card drawing or value capabilities ability here. Pay 5 mana, shuffle your library and exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. That sounds amazing. But it doesn't sound that hot anymore when you realize that most of the cards that you're going to flip into are counterspells or forms of interaction that are situational. You use them when you need to, you just don't throw them out there into nothing. And I never really see experienced Urza players sit there and activate the ability of Urza to gain value. They're usually relying on the Mono Blue's capability of drawing cards. Now this shouldn't be a problem, as Mono Blue have access to Mystic Remora and Rhystic Studies. And Mono Blue also got its hands on a new card, Ledger Shredder, that isn't actually card draw, it's more of card filtering. You get to draw and discard cards. Still, it's a really good card. However, you can't play it, because once again you're on a polymorph strategy, which means we're back to Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora. Well, we could also play Teferi, Master of Time, a really great mono blue planeswalker, not card draw, card filtering once again. Draw and discard, but still he's able to really dig through your deck here. As well, I think you should consider Karn, Scion of Urza, that is able to create constructs that will help you with your polymorph strategy, as well as being able to accumulate some grindy value. They are not great, but the problem is that only relying on Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study, 2 cards inside a 99 deck, is you're not gonna draw them consistently, so you might end up in a game where you're in top decking mode most of the time. But who cares about card draw? Let's just win fast with Urza instead. Well, that's not possible, because the speed and consistency isn't that great for Urza when you start to compare it to the opponents he's gonna go up against. Urza is basically just too slow. He's never gonna be able to outrace the opponents. Or well, one game here and there you might be the one that is fastest towards your combo, but it will be a rarity. And that means, now listen carefully because this is important, because you're not the fastest deck at the table usually, means that you have to go for a more slow, mid-range style of play. And that simply isn't possible, because the grinder capabilities just isn't that great here. We have a ability that we can't use because we might flip into Force of Wills, we might flip into useless things, counterspells, so you're just paying 5 mana to exile a card from your library and nothing happens. And the 99 isn't able to back it up, so our mid-range plan doesn't work. And we are forced to play a mid-range plan. Now let's talk consistency. That is actually quite okay here. Now we don't have access to black, so we're lacking the best tutors in the game. However, Proteus Staff, that is an alternative polymorph card, is an artifact, and blue is really good at tutoring for just artifacts. So finding this combo isn't that hard, however interacting with this combo is kinda easy. You need to spot remove an artifact or spot remove a creature, rule of law effects, anti-activations of various kinds, and just increasing casting cost of things in general, and you're basically stopping this combo somewhere down the line. And once you've stopped it, well, there's another problem for you. Its rebuild capabilities is also quite bad. One of the best ways of having resilience, being able to go for it again, is having card draw. So if your combo is interacted with and all the cards ends up in your graveyard, drawing into more cards will usually solve the problem. Drawing into spells that will reanimate cards from your graveyard, drawing to Time Twister, that's a great card here. Shuffle all the cards back into your deck and you can draw into them again. But once again, card draw in this deck is in general quite bad. So what I usually see going up against Urza is that people are sitting there and being slowed down by various kinds of stacks effects from Urza, or Urza is using counterspells that it has a lot of against opponents that are trying to win fast. And then because Urza isn't able to grind value as well, you can sit there and just draw more cards than everyone else and then overpower everyone, because card draw in a long game is a win con. I would be so frank to say that Urza, with all of its counter spells and its lack of card draw, is king-making the deck that is able to draw most of the cards inside the pod. Eventually, Urza will be drained from all of its resources, no longer has any counterspells in its hand, and then just overpower everyone with your huge attrition that you've accumulated by just drawing more cards and putting more lands into play compared to everyone else. What about all of its amazing stacks cards like Back to Basic or Static Orb? Let's begin with Back to Basic, a card that's actually started to become a little bit weaker and weaker because we're not as reliant on lands anymore, as we're getting more and more mana rocks that are great and more mana dorks. Now, Static Orb, on the other hand, is actually quite great, but there's always gonna be one of your 3 opponents that aren't that heavily affected by it. For example, there might be a player sitting with a Gaia's Cradle in play and will be able to play through Static Orb without a problem. And in this little scenario, you are actually kind of king-making the player with the Cradle. Now, a very common response I get here is that we just need a whole bunch of different stacks cards in play, like the Static Orb, maybe a Tabernacle, a great card inside Urza, by the way, as you're going for a polymorph strategy, and then just add a counterbalance in there as well, and some Winter Orbs, Back to Basics, all cool stacks cards that will just strangle all opponents. The problem with all of this, again, is that you're going to require a lot of card draw to get here. Now, of course, there might be opening hands that contain both Static Orb and Tabernacle in there together, and you get a great, horrible start for your opponents. But the truth is that your consistency of drawing or having these ones, the great ones, and drawing into more of the great ones isn't that huge, because there aren't that many of these that are this amazing. And even like Static Orb is something that you can play through. It's not gonna hold people back from winning the game, it's just gonna make their game plan slower. For example, let me showcase a card for you. Mind Lock Orb, a 4 CMC artifact. Players can't search libraries. I don't see any Urza player play this because it's also shutting you down from searching your library. But this is like the best Mono Blue has, or well, it's the only thing Mono Blue has, as anti-search effects. So once again, the games that I observe with Urza in the pod are usually being slowed down by Urza with various stacks effects, counterspells, but no one is completely shut down. Then later on in the game, Urza might be trying to go for the win, and sometimes that is interacted with, and then Urza sits there and in usually top decking mode, trying to get back into the game with a really poor rebuild capability. And then everyone else is just sitting there and trying to speed up with their great card draw capabilities. There's usually some player in the pod versus Urza that is able to grind better than everyone else, and that player usually takes the win. I think a big problem is that we can't play creatures. Oh, well, I shouldn't say can't play creatures, because there are actually versions of Urza that do play creatures, that don't go for the polymorph strategy. But in the end, we need more cards like Ledger Shredder to give Mono Blue more consistent grindy value cards that could help a commander that isn't great at drawing cards like Urza. We would also need more cool stacks effects. If we have a lot of really amazing stacks cards in Mono Blue, or well, in artifacts would be fine as well, we could sit there and just activate Urza over and over. We could cut close to all counterspells. Sounds really crazy. I don't think you should do that, by the way, but reduce the amount of counterspells and increase the amount of stacks in the game and transform Urza's ability into a card drawing ability. I actually have a deck like that. It's called Urza Turns. I will leave a link in the description below of the video for that deck tech, but in short it's very simple. You play a lot of extra turn spells, you cut counter spells, and you increase stacks cards, and with that you can sit and activate Urza's ability as much as you want. You're going to flip into extra turn spells, which means you're gonna untap everything, you can activate Urza more, or you flip into stacks cards, so it's gonna make it hard for your opponents to win, which is gonna give you more turn cycles, and that means more options to activate Urza, and eventually you dig through the deck until you have an enormous board state with a lot of stacks cards, a lot of lands, and then you basically win with Nexus of Fate and attack with your Construct until your opponents are dead. That deck does play Mindlock Orb, but the big problem with that deck, I did playtest it a bunch, is that there are just too weak stacks effects for Mono Blue and artifacts in general. You aren't able to like stranglehold 3 opponents consistently and effectively, and yeah, someone just wins through your weak stack options basically. But if these 2 points would improve over time, and I actually do think they're gonna improve over time, I think we're gonna see a lot more great card draw capabilities or grindy abilities from Mono Blue in the future, similar to Ledger Shredder, and I also think we're gonna see eventually some stacks effects for Mono Blue or artifacts that could help out a lot for Urza. Those were my points, the things you need to consider when you're building Urza. Thank you for watching, hope you liked the video or that you found it inspiring in any form of way. Take care guys, see you next time.